Wildcats.
Hi, I'm Tina Bursill, and I was in this episode, I think. Yes.
I'm Michael Idato. I'm the TV critic for the Sydney Morning Herald, and I, at the time of broadcast, was watching this episode.
Stand the man!
We're in the recap for the previous episode at the moment. Andy Anderson, Elspeth Ballantyne.
It's great the women are getting the trip, isn't it?
Oh, it did them the world of good. I'm surprised the governor let me go, though, after having me on the carpet today.
Oh, what have you been up to?
Andy Anderson used to be in a band. He was actually, he was in a band before he became an actor.
I feel about it, Rick, but you sure you're not getting in too deep?
I've been up to my armpits now.
And Elspeth Ballantyne used to be married to a man called Dennis Miller, a wonderful actor.
I saw those fellas that shot him.
God, have you reported it?
What's the point?
It's a big handled moustache, isn't it?
It is a big, it's a big handlebar moustache. We're obviously back in the sort of the grey uniform era of Prisoner, which was sort of probably the first sort of couple of hundred episodes.
What were the other colours?
They went khaki.
Oh.
They went khaki.
I was in denim. No lace, but
Of
denim.
course, absolutely. You look fine in denim. You cut a fine figure in prison denim. And of course, a second ago we saw Brian James, who you were in Skyway with, and this is you.
I don't remember this bit. Oh, that's right. I love those long
Dressing
gowns. That's a breathless reaction, isn't it?
Something in my room.
Now the lady's saying things. So if it doesn't bite you in the night. Good night, Stevens.
No one was ever in this show for the wardrobe budget, I'm sure.
No. It's interesting, though, that outfit made me look taller than what I actually am. I actually liked wearing that outfit at the time, not for looks, but for comfort. Mm-hmm. They were always so cosy and you could just let loose in it. Strange thing to say about a wardrobe, but it was always good.
Absolutely.
One of the good things about Prisoner, actually, was the fact that you could be denuded. By that I mean no makeup, fairly basic. Oh,
Enter the Snake.
that would have been a cutaway. I certainly don't remember that.
Being shot. The mug shots, Maxine
Yes.
Clippingatus.
I love that. She was a good girl. Liked Maxine.
Now, you've been mug shotted here. Mm. Did they obviously shot those mug shots prior to you joining the show?
Yes, which was some episodes ago, according to this. I originally came into the show for 6 weeks. Mm-hmm. I'd come out of a long-running TV show, one of which was called Skyways for the 7 Network, and then I moved on to the ABC and did another one called Winner Take All for a year. My aspirations was always to be in Prisoner. I wanted to be in Prisoner because all the good actors were in Prisoner. And I have a strange voice here. It's very sotto voce.
Hey, maybe it was a python wearing a top hat.
Could have been a trap.
She was undiscovered, that little Maxine. She was one of her first professional jobs. And I think much later she married the props master. Mm-hmm. I think they had a couple of children. Carolyn Gilmer on the left. That lady there. She's got a fantastic singing voice.
Come on, one of you put something in there.
Us? Kind? Thoughtful little us? Yeah, we wouldn't hurt a fly.
Right, what's the hold up?
Mr. Manning, I told you last night there was something in my cell.
Oh, you're not still on that kick.
There's an educated Australian voice there, isn't there?
There is, definitely.
Quiet.
Now, this is probably not a rude question for an actress. This is your hair?
Yes.
Just checking.
Just checking. There's a couple of shots later on. It looks like a nylon wig. There's a real Barbie doll invention happening on with my hair, I think. Mm-hmm. Because we weren't allowed to... that's indicative of the type of woman she was. They all wanted her to crack, I think, because Sonia was a fairly... Sonia was actually fairly one-dimensional, I think. Because she had a lot to conceal. The old Sonia.
She was a policeman's wife.
Policeman's
who was
wife.
up to her ears in bad business dealings.
Indeed, and I think she was pretty much. I was just going to say he was a Mr. Big, and there was a lot of corruption going on, but she too she held her own very well. So often when having looked at this episode or looking at it now, Sonia, actually, you're not quite sure whether this is a facade or whether, in fact, she's in order to find her own pecking order again. Just a thought, just an idea that maybe Sonia's trying to reinvent herself, because I think she certainly didn't have the girls on side in earlier episodes, even though she came in as a top dog. She had a lot to hide, a lot to conceal, that girl. She needed, so no one, in order for her to keep the distance from prying minds of the other women, because in that, the actual essence of that show was always to, I suppose, power. Power. All the women needed to have a sense of power, which makes that show quite unique. And in fact, it was quite controversial, I think. What year was it?
The show started 78, 79 and went through to 86. And I think, is probably deserves its place in TV history in a strange way, because it was really about, it was actually about the disempowerment of women, taking women who are naturally nurturers and sort of emotional and empathic creatures, and taking them into an environment where they're denied emotion and they're denied power, but in which there's a secondary power structure where they suddenly have to fight to survive.
That's right. But, this character here, now this is Janet
Andrew Arthur.
The James Dean.
Yes.
You'll notice in one of these, I think there's a James Dean poster.
I think you're right, in the recreation room.
Which is why I'm looking at the food hall now. I think there may be something. She came into the episode and see that long look? That long look. Yes, nothing free form there. She was an interesting character too. As I said, the James Dean look-alike. Everybody had a look of sorts. Mine was that basin haircut, which I was trying to break away from the glamour image I had in Skyways and Winner Take All. In fact, you just said 79. Prisoner was in 79. I was doing another, I suppose, a woman who was then pushing the boundaries and that running an airport. So when you think about the late 70s and women, yes, the disempowerment of women in this, but another restructuring of power.
Totally, absolutely.
Oh, I love this. Oh, my God, that is real. The walls aren't. The walls have got a little bit of cardboard there.
Well, the snake is real. Now, you had a snake wrangler.
There was a snake wrangler,
set.
and I think all of us were scared of a snake coming in. We were told we would never see the snake. We were told as women that we would never see the snake. They would do cutaway shots of the snake. So there was always a sugar bag lying around with the shape of a snake in the sugar bag. And we were led to believe that it was just a shape in a sugar bag. But in fact, there was a bloody snake in it. And of course, I'm not keen on snakes, full stop. It's because they don't stand up and greet me. And I can't tell you, it was really nerve-wracking for a lot of us. And then stupid. Oh, I know, there was a bit of an incident on set where somebody threw the bag at someone, or I think I was part of it. Somebody threw the bag at me and I screamed. And instead of laughing and joking, which everybody else was, I turned and I actually said, do you realise somebody could have dropped dead and had a heart attack? I could have had a heart attack, because I was a very heavy smoker in those days. So I was thinking selfishly of myself, of course. But I did. I screamed. I was so angst-ridden by this snake that I made a comment. And irresponsible, I think I said. You childish, you're irresponsible. I was already, control freak.
Oh, thank you, Stanley. All quiet in there?
But what we were saying... Oh, Brian James, you see, he was Mr. Tippett in Skyways with me. I still have a friendship with Brian. He's a wonderful man, a very, very, very funny man. He's got a delicious sense of humour. And we used to sneak a little cigarette or a little whiskey, but not on set or during working hours, but afterwards. Lovely man. I still see him. In fact, he just gave me a wonderful book about Sir Laurence Olivier. And he's 84 now, I suppose.
You'd obviously played a lot of authority figure women. when the obvious question is, insofar as you obviously wanted to be in Prisoner, at what point did it become available? Did they come to you and say, are you interested in this? Had your agent gone to them to say, Tina's very keen?
They came to me, actually, and it's because, it's such a small country and a small pool of things. I was in Melbourne at the time. I just finished 2.5 years on Prisoner. I'd done ABC Winner Take All for a year. It was like a segue into the next show that was operating, or what the studios could afford to pay, which was On the Smell of an Oil Rag, but nonetheless we were producing Australian television then at quite a healthy rate. It was also the introduction of 10BA, which was around the early 80s too. However, I was thrilled to be invited to go, and I thought I was there really for 6 weeks, to replace, I think, B as the other top dog. And 6 weeks became 6 months, Oh, here we go, a bit of cleaning up. Oh!
Okay,
What?
The fastest response to a scream, I think, in the
he was
history
standing outside waiting.
Yeah, of course.
That's right. There you go. He was ready for that. Probably the AD just gave a quick,
Yep.
look at my hand, and as I drop it, run.
I'm not sure the real prison system can match that in response time.
It's just glorious performance work here. The hair looks like it's come off a broom. There's a little bit of nylon in there, it seems. It's a real haircut. I went to a lot of trouble to have that haircut.
Did you watch yourself comfortably? Is it easy to watch yourself?
I, to be honest with you, I'm floored by the fact that I had a career after this. I'm absolutely floored that I sustained a career after this. The sad part about it, yes, I laugh about it now because I know I've improved. I know I moved on to other things, but if I put myself back into that space, that headspace at the time, I actually thought I was okay. I thought I had a lot to offer the industry. God, we're delusional. Delusional. I was a child. How bad was that? I mean, other people say, oh, there you go. Now, his mother's a wonderful artist, and
Tyrrell Mora.
he went on to Frontline, which was the ABC. And in fact, I worked with him years later on a telemovie called Heroes Mountain, and which was the Stuart Diver story. And I remember the first night he arrived on that location, which was in Falls Creek in, Upper Victoria, in the snowfields. And none of us had been told that if you have an alcoholic beverage at a high altitude that you would in fact get there very quickly. And by that I mean intoxicated, and have a wow of a headache the next day. We all did that. This, Janet was, I thought, wonderful. Actually, she was a very serious actress. You see, I thought I was serious, but not.
We split the day. You can do what you bloody like. I'm not forgetting how you dumped me last.
I love talking into telephones.
Oh, no, it's fantastic.
Yes, it's great,
it's a joy.
isn't it?
It is a joy.
Because it's usually on another day. You're never in the same studio at the same time.
So we have here a prison outbreak, a breakout in the planning stages.
One of the things I observed, or when I was asked to go into Prisoner, I wanted to, the sort of actress, or the kind of actress that I was then, and I think still, I wanted to work my role. I needed to do research on it. So, as a matter of fact, a collection of us went out to the Fairlie, the women's prison. That was a very interesting and very different to what we had experienced, but it was meeting the women, and that's what I was saying before, how controversial it was to actually see women represented, because, I sat and had a cup of tea with a woman who'd killed her husband with arsenic. I must admit I did double-examine the cup of tea and wondered if I was still alive. Sweet, lovely, lovely human being. All those women. You looked at child abuse. Women were no longer sanctimonious in this, really. And that's what I mean by controversial. You had lesbians, you had child molesters, you had husband killers, bashings. It was really women seen in that light. And then, of course, on the other station, the other network in competition. You've got a woman, in my case, wearing very large shoulder pads, which were the armour of the 80s, women dressed in such a fashion.
To look like men.
To look like men, to combat, to, not be the little diminutive creatures that we were often represented. So, I mean, it was really quite wonderful, the series concept, how it evolved.
Well, why did she do it?
I think I will have that coffee now, Alan.
Why?
It's laced with arsenic.
Kay?
There's a lot of surrendering of emotions in a lot of these scenes.
For a long time, and I just can't believe that.
In the show's kind of stock redress of a living room, which I think has probably served as a living room to countless people.
Countless
over the years.
people. I observed in one of them, probably the very early days of product placement. I saw a packet of rice bubbles in the background there.
She doesn't deserve to be punished anymore.
For which I suspect the program wasn't paid.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
Yeah.
But when you think about a lot of stuff that was taken for granted, also product placement, which I find a little irksome sometimes. Those pants are very high on that boy, aren't they? That was very 80s.
He's a victim of his era.
Yeah,
There were only a couple of setups in Prisoner. There was walking to work, walking to the dining room, in the recreation room. There was it was a show that probably didn't have a lot of breadth in terms of how it was shot. It was composed of a sequence of stock shots into which they wrote the drama.
And indeed, often you'd have a new director who'd come in and wanted to be a little clever or give a little freshness, but there was very little you could do. You could either walk down towards that fire hydrant or you could walk back. And you could turn left or you could turn right.
Absolutely.
So depending on your direction. But a lot of the... look at that. That's a Walkman.
It's a Walkman.
Look at the size of what we've got now. We've got iPods. The size of it.
It is one. And weirdly, Prisoner, one of the great advantages of Prisoner is because of the bricks and the mortar and the uniforms, although it's old, it's strangely timeless. And it's only moments like that where the technology confronts you and you sort of see the world's biggest tape recorder that you realise that it obviously comes from some time ago.
That's right, and I also think too. I'm sorry, but the technical, what you were just referring to with, the location of the prison, also as the stock standard shots, the way directing, how people directed it. There's always the stock standard 2-shot and the singles and a master. This really was the epitome of that. You could do no more. If you were on an angle, you always felt self-conscious because you weren't in the stock rigid face-to-face. See, there's your classic gorgeous close-up. There you go. I've walked in from an angle. I'm not sure what angle. Oh, as if she'd touched someone. That's very...
Should be on a charge.
And look at the lowered eyes.
I swear it.
You're getting boring, you know that? I don't care if there was something in
But
yourself.
it might kill me.
Yeah, well, at least you'd have a better chance than what Meryl King had, eh?
I told you I had nothing to do with that.
Oh, no, of course not. Never do your own dirty work, do you?
We've got a great line coming up here.
A couple of germs do it for you.
Are you trying to avoid...
Oh, well, you see, that's my Streetcar Desire moment there.
That is, yeah.
It's very much... In fact, I recalled that at the time. I said, you're Marlon Brando walking away from me. I remember saying that.
Well, it's an unusual type of shot even for Prisoner. Prisoner was always, threats were delivered in low voices. It's actually a very close show for a loud shot like that.
Yes, I'm questioning and digging very deep to respond to that, actually, because I thought it was just dreadful. Truly dreadful. But Sonia seemed, actually, when you think about it, I suppose Sonia took over a lot of areas. Just wanted to... It's the music.
Yeah, you know that the snake is
something's
shot.
going to happen.
Yes.
That's right. Poor little thing didn't know what was going on. But yes, Sonia's character, I was just thinking, she came in as one-dimensional, very, very contained. And when you just see this development of Sonia is now explosive.
Yeah, and brittle, and clearly vulnerable, and I think there are cracks.
That was the
where the
writing.
cracks start to show, you can clearly see she's I think you were saying before you didn't know whether it was one note or whether it was actually like she was deliberately putting on a performance as a character. And I think it's apparent that she is actually a pretty just a vulnerable, just an ordinary woman, being incredibly strong or incredibly having to put on personal, physical, psychological armour, emotional armour because of the situation. Even before she went to prison, clearly as a kind of as a criminal, sort of a micro-criminal kingpin.
Oh, I think she was a Mr. Big, Mr. Big in the underworld.
What's she talking about? I don't know. She must be gone mad or something.
The snake, you see, the snake was the Achilles. I thought sure James Dean was in the background there. See, Sonia's going over the edge.
Yeah.
It all happened so suddenly, didn't it? Overnight. I always thought she was a really tough cookie, but snakes.
Well, we all have our funny little fantasies, do you?
Yeah.
I'll get my fags.
Oh, you'd forget your head if it wasn't screwed on you, wouldn't you?
Oh, I love it when you talk dirty.
I love that joshing moment there between the girls. Just joshing, getting ready for something, do you think? Oh, that was a small scream.
That was a muted scream.
It was. It bit. She's got makeup on. We weren't allowed to wear makeup. I love that. She's glazed over. But you'll note this shot. You'll note that you're not seeing. You're not seeing the actors with the snake.
Yep.
So it was all shot. Now Judith McGrath. Judith McGrath. Of course, she's in All Saints, and she does a wonderful job in All Saints.
Mate, you all right?
Outside,
What are you going to do?
Steve Mann shot this. So that was a bit of creative directing there, not just standard walk down the hall.
Absolutely. Now, Betty Bobbitt's stock in trade, the sort of the panicked shriek in a riot, in a fire, in a snake attack.
In a snake attack, and the girls are just passed out there. Do you think Stan's going to cut the saw and suck the blood out? Do you think?
I think he's, being a stout Australian man, he'll have a solution.
He'll have a solution.
In the planning stages.
Now here's Gerda. Gerda was a beautiful actress who's since passed away. She was a lovely governor, wasn't she?
She was. She was in the Prisoner, obviously cast governors in a certain mould. There was Patsy King was very
Patsy
sort of
King.
it was always the idea that the governor somehow was the reformer who was attempting to change the system that was kind of
like
entrenched.
all good governors, I suspect, in the penal system now.
There was a British show called Within These Walls, which predates Prisoner, which had Australian actress Googie Withers as the governor. In a lot of ways, although visually very different to Prisoner, but in a lot of ways very evocative. The same structure, a kind of a uniformed establishment that do it the old way, and an ultra reformist who's constantly let down by the fact that the prisoners want to cause mischief.
There's one in every there's one in every society.
I'm
Someone's
sure.
always wanting to push buttons. There's now Babs McMillan. Oh, she came in too, I think, to play Top Dog at one point. But Babs McMillan became a director after that. Now, I should point out here that the Queen. Now, the Queen, the photo of the Queen has been in most shots. It's the same one.
Yes.
Props moved that round very well. The food here, when we'd have food
Dining room
days,
scenes.
oh, God, I used to loathe them because the food was usually mashed potatoes, peas, real food. And, of course, the long hours on food days, which we'd have 2 days a week in the mess hall, you'd eat the food. And, of course, you'd come... Oh, I'm sorry, I just heard my own voice there going for a moment. And, oh, dear.
You see, I slept with that thing last night. All night. In the dark.
Strange voice. And, yes, I have to move on from her. But the food, I was fearful of putting on weight, and I was a very heavy smoker, and I decided to give up smoking. So in the lunch break, I used to go to the nearest pool and swim 17 laps. Come back, quick blow.
If you're a fan of Australian drama, we should probably point out was the Holiday Island pool, which was on the site
It was.
the prison.
I'd like to tell you that it was, but it wasn't.
Oh.
I did that later, but no, it wasn't that pool.
Oh,
I
okay.
actually drove to the Nuttawading pool.
Oh, okay.
At Box Hill nearby, and I used to go. All I could fit in with my lunch break was to drive, do 17 laps, come back, quick blow wave the hair, mouth in a sandwich, and off I'd go. That was my way of. Actually, that was my way of combating, which was a really insular world when you think about it. I'd leave for work in the morning in the dark, 4:30, because I'd start at 6. I never saw daylight. And I'd leave, but I became quite nocturnal, which has a terrible effect on you psychologically. And sitting around all the time, and all women, exchanging recipes, eating the food. It was a very, quite a depressing environment to be in. And yet, you see, I was told to shut up then, and I almost responded. But it's I read a few of those books too.
A lot of people who worked on Prisoner do talk about that sort of the intensity of that. I mean, it's Nunawading, particularly in those days. Now it's kind of the heart of suburbia, but at this time it was kind of beyond suburbia. It was way out. It was surrounded by a lot of bushland. It was a pretty isolated spot in a lot of ways.
Except for the
production.
And also the hardware store, which was either a Bunnings or a BBC hardware store. And that would fill in your fancy for a bit. You go and trawl those shelves looking for something to play with. And, that's really all. You're absolutely right. So it really had quite a psychological effect, I think, as it's quite... small spaces can become quite incestuous. And, they really implode on themselves, and particularly female energy such as that. To go to work, you'd have a locker, you put your things in the locker, oh, hello. Everybody had their bits, you'd have all the extras. And there was really very little you could do. And it was airless as an environment as well. And it was hard to also, it almost felt like the characters you played on set infiltrated into the dynamic in a green room environment. I found that. And
I think that happens a lot. I think, the actors who worked on Lost have talked about how, being in that sort of shooting in Hawaii or being in that isolated environment, they kind of adopted that castaway mentality. You often find, I think, in these situations where there are sort of demarcation lines in a way within the structure of the story, the actors do fall on the right and the correct side of their line. So, with this show, did you find the inmates socialised with the inmates, the actors playing the officers socialised with the other actors playing the officers? Was there that divide? There
was that divide, and there was also, but there became personalities. Less than the uniform or the role. It was more about personalities. And I mean, that, of course, as a performer, you tend to, as much as you loathe admitting it, but you do take on board a lot of the characteristics sometimes of what you're playing. I mean, if you're a comedy, you're sort of quite up for the day. If you're playing Mrs. Mac with Macbeth, you tend to be a bit dour. But in this case, I mean, I felt very isolated, but I did that to myself. I removed myself because I was that role, which was extraordinary when you think about it. So that fueled more tensions. There were a lot of tensions off screen, a lot. And I had an interesting relationship with the Freak because not only did I know Maggie and I, as characters in earlier episodes, really went one for one as characters, and we had a connection. And even though, we had a connection, and it was a healthy, respectful one, because we were both very, very powerful women. So that was uniform against an inmate, when you think about it. Oh, now that steamer, you'd like to think that was hot? Not. No. We had someone sitting down underneath there that used to push a smoke machine. Now, this character, Annie Phelan, I've just recently seen her. There was a documentary on the ABC, brilliant, called The Choir of Hard Knocks. It's about the homeless people. And Annie Phelan, I saw her in the street with these homeless people, and I've discovered, I think she's got an Order of Australia.
Okay.
I think. She was always proactive. It's interesting, if you wanted to ever get into star signs, it's really interesting. The stars, if you had any interest in. Annie's a Leo. I'm a Leo. Sheila Florence was a Leo. and Maggie's an Aquarian. It was really interesting looking at the dynamic of all these, if you wanted to look into it, if there's any truth in it. That's at the back of Channel 10.
Yes, in Melbourne.
And that was where the car park was, actually, around the back. That then later became Holiday Island, I think.
And then Lassiter's Lagoon from Neighbours.
Lassiter's Lagoon. Well, because Janet's in that Neighbours now.
Oh, hell, Rip. What are you trying to do to me? I didn't know you was on the run. Heard about it on the radio.
The other interesting thing about this set is there's a door. The door into the prison was a door into an enclosed space that sort of went nowhere. There was like an alcove behind the door. So when you would shoot scenes going in the front door of the prison, you would sort of go in, but it didn't obviously lead anywhere. You then would have to sort of come back out after the shot.
Well, the studio environment was in itself was like a tunnel. I mean, I used to walk into, when you talk about doorways to where? You'd walk in, and it was like a tunnel that went down. So you almost feel like you were a sheep going in to be douched or something, because you'd come in, sit in one chair to have your hair combed or powder on your nose, even though they want to avoid all of that. And then you'd move into the next chair for something else, and then you'd be out on the other end, and then you'd walk back into your Besser block green room, and then go onto the set. It's an extraordinary environment.
It's funny. I was intrigued that you said airless before, because I mean I've physically walked that tunnel at Nunawading myself, and it is airless. It's one of those I can see whenever I've had conversations with people who've worked on Prisoner over the years who have said, you know, you need to kind of have walked it to understand it, and I have walked it, and I did at the end of it sort of think, you know, my God, how did people work here? It is bleak and dark and sort of depressing.
But I don't think it was ever the intention of an art department or the producers to recreate a space. It just happened because television was cheap.
Absolutely.
And you made do. You never had hardly any of the conditions with which we work under now. They evolved because of those conditions. When the Besser block was built in the studio for us to have as a green room, that came out of requests because we had nowhere. We didn't have anywhere to sit between scenes. Sitting on set was no good because you can't speak. So that was elevated our positions. Yes, I'm trying to think of that doorway there. I'm not sure about that. I just remembered the roller door went into the studio when that was open.
Which it still does.
Does it?
Yep. And the door...
Do you think that's real?
Well, it's actually...
Do you think it's had a little shot to go to bye-byes? It's a pretty good rubber one, isn't it? Let's get the RSPCA onto those people. I don't remember that. There's a bit of tension in this scene.
There is here. There's obviously a bit of something going on. Obviously, within the framework of the story, Gerda's character has left the prison, and Colleen, played by Judith McGrath, has obviously saw the path to promotion as governor. Gerda's returned and displaced her, and so there's a frosty.
Frosty?
Yes.
Well, Judith's very good with frost.
This is fantastic.
I think we should count ourselves very lucky.
It's also a setup for a scene later on.
Wrong. Perhaps you shouldn't go on this trip. Oh, no, I'll go. The department isn't too happy about the project, and neither am I. So I would rather be in charge to see that nothing goes wrong. Quite frankly, Colleen, you and the department can go to hell with your negative attitude. When I came to this place, it was like something out of the Dark Ages. Well, I am going to change that. I would have liked you to help me. But if you're going to sulk around this place just because I came back to the job, then you can get out. Because otherwise you'll just get in the way and be a bloody nuisance. Now, what is it going to be?
Which in some ways taps the heart of, I guess, what's going on in prison. You have reform versus the establishment. You have kind of regulation versus freedom.
As you, in fact, brought up earlier. I would have called it a hissy fit myself, given it's an episode about snakes.
Yes. Well, that's sort of the struggle. I guess that's the struggle to intellectualise about it. And you do, I mean, in hindsight, it's very easy to intellectualise about it. You do wonder at the time if the writers were overly conscious of kind of those issues. Certainly at the beginning of Prisoner, I think, where the writing sort of, I guess, landscape of Prisoner came from, there was some awareness of prison reform and those kinds of issues. Certainly they'd seen within these walls those issues might have been part of it. But obviously, as a continuing drama, that all sort of at some point gets pushed to the side, and the thrust of the show becomes kind of characters and situations.
Driven by characters, yeah.
Absolutely.
But relevant. Absolutely, as I said, controversial in the fact that it's representational of women in power. They don't have to be wearing a suit to be in power, but the structure within, and warm and friendly. And where did they get the time to make that cake? And where? And
when they're working in the laundry.
When they're working in the laundry, and also the size of it, and a knife. As if a prisoner would be given a good grief. Look at the size of the knife. Would you be given a knife?
Yeah.
Really?
Yes.
I mean,
clearly.
really.
There are some holes. I think
Holes? That's huge. I remember sitting at Fairley and I had a plastic spoon on my cup. I probably could have broken the cup and slit my wrists.
For its time and for what it was, do you think it was well written? Were you conscious that the writing was solid?
Yes, it had holes in it because, one week it could be carnivorous and the next week it could be a vegetarian. But I think I'd hark back to what we were saying earlier. It was more about the concept and the idea that was good about it, and why, I asked myself, did I long to be in it? I saw it as serious work. I saw it as a job. Because we were in Melbourne, and because we're in the 80s, which is kind of in a retro space we're in now, fashion and everything was so glossy and big. So to look at something that was denuded and grassroots and dealing with human emotion seemed to be such a very welcoming. So I'm answering your question around that way, that it was a welcoming thing. It felt real. And, yeah, it does stand up. I'm intrigued. It's the style of acting. I mean, we've talked about the shots, in terms of classic television. And that's honoured. It's not too fast. And look at this, is this man going to jump in that car or break the car down or do something to it? I wonder. Wouldn't you? He's the only person on the street.
He's got villain written all over him. In fact, this is Marcus Eyre, who, interestingly, Tyrrell Moore, who was in this episode, went on to do Frontline. Marcus Eyre is in Frontline. He's the chain smoking. Speaking of chain smoking, video editor in the edit suite.
Oh, of course. See, smoking we don't see. Well, we don't see people smoking very much at all on television now. And that's intriguing. What's intriguing about it? What's intriguing about it, I suppose, is personal. Again, I was a very, very heavy smoker, and the television series I was in prior to this, I was so preoccupied with continuity of cigarettes that I had them all lined up and broken off at different intervals for the different shots because I nearly killed myself. I'd smoked so many cigarettes in every scene. So when I came into Prisoner, I opted not to smoke. I made it very, very, very clear I was not going to smoke in this show. I wish I'd give myself that prop now because I didn't realise I looked so stiff and awkward with that nylon hair.
You could have set the nylon hair on fire. I mean, you do need to be careful while
I should
smoking.
have done something. But
it is a strange thing that does date television. It is one of those.
Yes.
When you watch television of a certain time, and the relentless smoking and smoking out of any context, just smoking simply for the sake of holding a cigarette in the shot.
But remember, smoking for most of us, I remember light up a Viscount, or the Stuyvesant ad, or the Marlborough, the Big Country, was such a romantic and also, sophisticated thing was smoking. Not only did it give you something to do, but, which was a nightmare if you're filming, because of the ash, the length of the ash, or where was it? No, I don't think, I think you were halfway through it. That magazine, I'm reading that with great intensity.
Yes. Extraordinary speed. And this is, we're about to sort of, we're heading
flirtatious there, don't you think?
with Meg.
No, oh dear, that long dressing gown.
It's dead, Stevens. I know how you feel.
Don't
I
lock
am
the
tall.
door.
Quite tall.
Yes. You are tall.
Either that or she's very short. Oh dear, poor little thing.
It was the most unconvincing lock of a key.
Didn't make a big sound,
No,
did it?
it just sort of sounded like she rattled about the lock somewhere.
Yeah.
And here we go in. Now, are you shocked at the snake or the terrible wardrobe in the prison?
A bit of the wardrobe.
Yep.
I thought I wasn't sure. Should I be wearing that? I was saying, or should I stay in my pajamas? I got so confused with the blue shirt, the slightly rusty coloured shirt. They were our wardrobe changes, day 1, day 2. And I fought always to wear the skirt. I liked wearing the skirt. Well, depending on what I'd eaten that morning or how much food I was eating on that day, I'd have the button-up one.
The boiler suit was the least attractive option.
I didn't get that. Now, this is a very good artistic moment, don't you think? Sitting
Are
in
you
a
saying
sink.
that ironically? I actually think it is. I think it's...
Look,
I
little
do.
face. It's very hard to keep that gaze. Why did you think it was?
Oh, no, I just thought it was... I mean, I think if you're going to embrace it, you have to believe it in a lot of ways. And as a TV critic, embracing it and believing it is kind of all about my job. This is an interesting scene because this really illustrates, I think, one of what became the great weakness of Prisoner in its later life, which was the recycling of plots. So, we've basically... The car has been rigged with a bit of a situation that's about to happen. That it's a storyline that was basically duplicated from an earlier incident in which the family of the Deputy Governor Jim Fletcher were blown up.
Right, yes.
And particularly for this episode, the arrival of Anne Phelan killed her husband, daughter was on drugs. It's a similar circumstance to B. Smith. So really, they'd created this pool of stock characters in a lot of ways. And when you moved B. Smith out, they obviously sort of... Myra Desmond enters as in the fit of B. Smith. Kind of, she's designed to kind of fit the whole. When Lizzie Birdsworth left, a succession of old kind of cranky women were put in an attempt to kind of recapture that. And that sort of, I think, exposes the one weakness of the show in that it became quite formulaic.
Well, I would have thought that also the weakness was when we started going beyond the prison walls. Once you start going into other people's lives, yes, that was special effect. That was a late reaction. I thought when the storyline went beyond the prison walls, it started to diminish the power of just that one existence of the one hallway, the various cells, and the rec room. I think it just had more power. So stories changed a little bit. It's really, I was just thinking, Sue Masters was the producers on this. Sue Masters is, God, she's gone from the ABC. She was wonderful to have around, actually. She was fantastic. I guess her credentials as a storyteller also, she was very, very proactive in the storytelling of that. She always opened it up to the actors and would ask if you've got something you want to work towards or let's have a talk about it. So, it's fairly open. And she's at Channel 10 now, isn't she still at Channel 10?
She is, yep.
Beautiful song.
It is a beautiful song.
I always wanted to sing along with this. And Ansett.
We're at Ansett, yep.
Defunct Ansett.
We are at the end of episode 433, recorded in September of 1983.
83, was it?
And revisited in June of 2007. Very
You'll
sweet.
love it. Very good.
Very sweet.
And Grundy's now called Fremantle.
Yes. Network 10, still Network 10. And all rights still reserved.